Hey there. Tonight, we're stepping into something a little darker. Not dragons or knights or fair maidens in high towers, but the gritty, unvarnished reality of the Middle Ages. Forget the Hollywood fantasies of gallant heroes and glittering castles. We're talking about plagues, punishments, and a pot of something vaguely edible bubbling on the fire. Think you could survive a single day back then? Spoiler, you probably wouldn't. Before we tumble headfirst into this grim time machine, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, only if you genuinely enjoy this kind of storytelling. And in the comments, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see how far this little medieval nightmare travels. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that comforting background hum. And get ready, because you've just woken up in the year 1325. The good news, you're alive. The bad news, so are the fleas. You groggily sit up on a straw mattress that's half rotted, stuffed with hay, bugs, and the distinct scent of barn floor. Because that's exactly what it was 3 months ago. There's no pillow, no memory foam, no Egyptian cot, just a coarse wool blanket that hasn't been washed since last winter, and now weighs about as much as a small cow from accumulated filth. The clang of a distant church bell jolts you fully awake. That's your alarm clock, loud, merciless, and deeply medieval. Your home is a one-room wooden hut, with no windows, no insulation, and a charming open-concept design livestock. Family and insects all share the same living space. The smell. Imagine a subtle blend of stale beer, human sweat, goat, and something you pray isn't mold, but deep down you know it is. There are no scented candles. If they existed, they'd just melt into the dirt floor anyway. You try to stretch, but regret it instantly. The air is freezing, and your body aches like you've been hit by a cart. You're 22 years old, which here means you're basically middle-aged. Your spine creaks like an old wooden door, and your knees rattle like a sack of stones being shaken by a confused peasant. You brace yourself and step out of bed. The floor is either wet, from last night's rain leaking through the thatched roof, or crusty with something your neighbor's chicken left behind. Either way, your bare feet are part of the ecosystem now. And privacy, that's a luxury you've never heard of. Your entire family, and maybe even a random cousin who never left, is waking up beside you. No bedroom, no curtains, no me time. Just communal living at its most intimate. Welcome to morning in medieval Europe, where you are never alone, because the fleas, rodents, and at least 8 other people are always with you. And that's just how the day begins. You somehow crawl out of your itchy hay pile, and now nature calls. And it isn't whispering, it's screaming. This is where you start missing modern plumbing. There's no toilet, no flush, no toilet paper, not even a resentful plunger in the corner. If you're a peasant, your bathroom is likely a wooden bucket behind the house, already filled to the brim thanks to Uncle Wolfston's bad turnip dinner last night. The smell is biblical. You do your business, hold your breath, and then here comes the medieval twist. You toss it into the street. Yes, the street. You're supposed to shout Gardy Lou, old French for watch out below, before dumping it out the window, but no one ever moves fast enough. Streets are open sewers, a bubbling mix of human waste, animal droppings, and mysterious liquids that defy explanation. If your town has public latrines, lucky you, you get to sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers in an outhouse, where privacy is mythical and ventilation is a fantasy. You might make small talk, but don't breathe too deeply. Toilet paper doesn't exist. People wipe with straw, moss, leaves, old rags, or if they're living the high life, a scrap of wool, sometimes nothing at all. This might explain why handshakes weren't a thing yet. Think castles are better, sort of. You might have a garderobe, a hole in the stone wall that drops your waist straight into the moat. Brilliant. Except attackers sometimes climbed in through it. Yes, Medieval siege tactics included entering through the latrine chute, so whether you're a farmer or a baron, toileting in the Middle Ages is a cold, public, humiliating ritual. One slip on a wet stone and you're nose first in humanity's leftovers. And you haven't even brushed your teeth yet, but we'll get to that. You've survived the toilet, you deserve a reward, right? Maybe a warm breakfast. Something comforting. Not here. This is medieval Europe. Nothing is comforting. Breakfast, if you can even call it that, is a wooden bowl of something that looks like it was scraped off a muddy boot. Meet your best friend and worst enemy, pottage. Pottage is a thick, gloopy stew of grains, root vegetables, and maybe a few beans if you're lucky. It's been simmering in the same pot for days, sometimes weeks. New ingredients are just thrown on top of the old. It's less of a recipe, more of an edible timeline. On the side, a hunk of bread so hard it could stop an arrow, made from coarse rye or barley flour, often bulked up with sawdust, ground acorns, or whatever else can stretch the dough. Wheat bread, that's the stuff of kings. This loaf isn't eaten, it's negotiated with. Thirsty, don't dream of orange juice or oat milk lattes. You're drinking beer. Yes, beer, at 6 in the morning. Why? Because the water is filled with parasites and filth. Weak ale is the safest option. Low in alcohol but high in survivability. Even kids drink it. No one's happy about it. But at least it won't kill you today. Craving meat, cheese, fresh fruit. Keep dreaming. Those are reserved for Sundays, saints' feast days, and the occasional moment of generosity from your Lord. Most peasants eat meat just a few times a year. Spice, a pinch of pepper costs more than your monthly wages. Salt is so valuable. It's locked up like treasure. So you chew your gritty bread, gulp your medieval beer, and try not to think about whether a rat shared your pottage while you slept. Breakfast doesn't energize you. It just happens to you. And now that you're properly underfed, it's time to work. Because in the Middle Ages, if you don't work, you don't eat. And you're already halfway to starvation. But before you go, let's get dressed. Not that it'll help. Your wardrobe consists of one outfit. Just one. A rough wool tunic or linen shift that you've worn every day for months. Maybe years. Fashion isn't seasonal here. It's just wear it until it falls apart or gives you a rash. Underwear. Optional. If you're lucky. Maybe, just maybe, you've got a linen under tunic shielding your skin. But if luck's not on your side, then congratulations. You're going commando beneath layers of scratchy, sweat-soaked wool, each piece lovingly stitched by someone who thought seamwork was just poking thread through holes until the fabric stopped falling apart. Forget modern luxuries. There's no washing machine, no soap, and definitely no dry cleaner tucked into the corner of your thatched hut. Your clothes are stained with life, stiff, crusty, and carrying a scent that falls somewhere between fermented compost and barnyard despair. And even if you want to wash them, good luck. First you'll need to lug buckets of water from the nearest river, which could be a half-day's walk. Then you've got to heat it over a fire, scrub your tunic with a mix of ash or lye, and hang it to dry, ideally under the sun that shows up maybe 3 days a year. As for shoes, if you're fortunate enough to own any, they're flimsy strips of untreated leather, haphazardly stitched, offering about as much arch support as a rotting banana peel. Most peasants just go barefoot, wading through mud, dung, and medieval landmines, better known as sharp stones and puddles, teeming with disease. Your skin, understandably, begins a lifelong vendetta against you. It starts with the itching, constant, unrelenting, soul-scratching itching. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs make themselves right at home on your body. They don't discriminate. Nobles, monks, toddlers, everyone's a walking insect farm. You might find yourself scratching your armpit with a wooden spoon mid-conversation with the village priest, and no one bats an eye. It's just life. Your skin becomes red and raw, your scalp a chewed-up battlefield of bites. Develop a rash. Too bad. There's no ointment, no dermatologist, no sympathetic nurse telling you it's probably scabies. You just keep suffering, and if you're lucky enough to avoid infection, well, then you've got a faithful medieval sidekick, an itchy, burning rash that stays with you for 6 months or more. Now that you're wrapped in damp wool and crawling in insects, it's time to put on your morning smile. Except you not because you're grumpy, but because smiling is a dangerous game in the Middle Ages. Not emotionally, Dentally, there's no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no floss. The concept of oral hygiene is about as fashionable as regular bathing, which is to say it isn't. If you're lucky, you might chew on a twig, maybe rinse your mouth with vinegar or wine, but mostly, your teeth are on their own, and they are not okay. By your mid-20s, your mouth resembles something dug out of a cursed tomb. Cavities are common, gums are inflamed and bleed when you so much as breathe, and that black staining on your teeth, that's not last night's stew, that's rot. You've got more decay in your mouth than a medieval root cellar. Sugar, while still a rare luxury, is becoming more accessible to the rich, used to show off, mostly in tiny extravagant desserts. So if you're a noble, congrats, you get to rot your teeth faster. Peasant, you'll get there too, courtesy of gritty porridge, stale bread, and decades of chewing your way through poorly milled grain. Toothaches. Get comfortable. They're your constant background music. The kind of pain that turns grown men into whimpering children. There's no ibuprofen, no dentist. If the pain becomes unbearable, your options are: pray, drink, or pull it out yourself, with pliers, if you're lucky. That's not a joke. Barber surgeons, yes, the same guy who cuts your hair, will yank out a molar by candlelight using an iron hook and zero anesthesia. Get an infected tooth. Brace yourself for fever, swelling, and possibly death. That's right, a simple toothache in the 1300s can kill you. No antibiotics, no hospital, just you, your rotting jaw, and the looming specter of sepsis. And if you think your love life might offer a reprieve, think again. Everyone has halitosis, kissing, more like a duel of bad breath. No one's falling for your smile, because it's not your smile that matters. It's your land, your livestock, and how many turnips you can produce in a year. Your mouth is a battlefield, and it's losing. But chin up, because now it's time to go to work. No cozy office, no ergonomic chair, no coffee break. Your job, like 90% of the population, is this: survive while laboring to support someone else's comfort. You're a peasant. Congratulations. That means you're waking up with the sun and working until it drops behind the trees. Your tools, a wooden hoe, a rusted sickle, and whatever bones in your back haven't given out yet. There's no weekend, no vacation, just 6 days of relentless toil. Sunday? That's for church, unless you're too busy harvesting, fending off raiders, or praying that your infected toe doesn't fall off. You dig, plant, weed, haul, and reap until your spine resembles a question mark. Tired? Too bad. No one asks how your mental health is doing. If you're a woman, your job description is twice as long. Field work, childcare, cooking, cleaning, spinning wool, feeding animals, and pretending your husband's lice haven't made the jump to your pillow. And kids, no school, no toys, just chores. By age 5, they're run a rake and a purpose. Stay alive and help. And if you're one of the rare few not working the fields, say a blacksmith or tanner, you're still toiling in darkness, heat, or filth, surrounded by fire, toxic fumes, or animal guts. The pay, use enough to survive. The perks, frequent bleeding, break a bone, tough, catch a fever, drink some warm beer and carry on. Because if you stop, even for a day, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, you're replaced. Welcome to the medieval workforce, where every job is an unpaid endurance trial. Now that your back is ablaze and your hands are raw, let's talk weather. Because in the Middle Ages, the sky doesn't just set the mood, it delivers punishment. Let's start with winter. No insulation, no central heating, not even proper window. Your house is a collection of wooden slats with gaps wide enough to fit a chicken through. The windows, covered in cloth, not glass. Firewood is expensive, and collecting it yourself, technically illegal. Yes, you can be punished or even executed for picking the wrong stick in the wrong forest. So you wrap yourself in your one damp wool tunic, huddle near a sputtering hearth, and hope your breath doesn't freeze in your nostrils. Your feet are cold, always. Your fingers, so stiff they barely bend. Frostbite isn't diagnosed, it's just bad luck. And when summer rolls around, you might hope for relief. But no, your home becomes a clay oven. There's no fan, no air circulation. You sweat through your clothes, but can't take them off, because showing too much skin is scandalous, and a great way to get sunburned, bitten, and judged all at once. The flies have declared war. They swarm your unwashed skin, lured by the stench of last week's goat stew fermenting in the corner like some forgotten science experiment. Mosquitoes buzz near your ear as you try to sleep, assuming you can sleep through the chorus of your neighbor screaming at his wife, and the endless cries of a dozen babies. Outside, the sun isn't shining, it's punishing. You bake in the fields under a brutal sky. No sunscreen, no hat, unless you've managed to twist some straw into a floppy crown like a scarecrow who's given up. And the worst part, you still have to work. Heat stroke isn't treated. It's called taking a bad turn. There's no break for the weather, so you're either shivering inside your drafty hovel, praying your frostbitten toes survive until spring, or you're sweating through your one pair of socks as your thighs chafe like raw meat. Seasons change, but misery doesn't. Your clothes still itch. Your food is still dreadful, and the next awful job is always waiting. Welcome to medieval climate control. Spoiler alert, there isn't any. Thirsty? Want to splash some water on your face and wake up from this muddy fever dream of a life? Too bad. In the Middle Ages, water isn't your friend, it's a slow, lurking assassin. That stream nearby, crystal clear, bubbling like something from a fantasy film. But don't be fooled. Upstream, someone probably dumped a chamber pot into it, or maybe a dead pig is quietly decomposing just out of sight. Every innocent sip is a gamble. Parasites, bacteria, and the entire microbial militia of medieval Europe waiting to invade your guts. That's why people drank beer. Yes, even children. But don't picture medieval kids doing keg stands. It was small beer low in alcohol, high in survival. The brewing process boiled the water, making it safer than whatever horrors lurked in the town ditch. Wine was another option, if you were rich and didn't mind starting your day with a hangover. Surely, you think, they must have bathed. In theory, yes. In practice, not really. Bathing was considered suspicious. People believed it opened your pores and let disease seep in, so the thick, sticky crust of filth on your skin was thought to be protective. Cleanliness was risky business. There were public bathhouses, places to wash, gossip, or engage in less holy pastimes. Naturally, the church stepped in and shut many down. Too much sin in the steam, apparently. Even if you wanted to bathe, it was a full production. You'd need to fetch water, boil it over a fire, pour it into a leaky wooden tub, and then hope no one else used it before you, or worse, after. As for rainwater, it sat in open barrels collecting bird droppings, mosquito larvae, and algae, still feeling refreshed. Whether it's for drinking, washing, or watering your pathetic excuse for crops, water in the Middle Ages is less a life source, and more a gamble. One unlucky gulp, and you're spending your final hours sweating on a straw mattress, clenching your stomach, and bargaining with whatever saint is listening. So let's say you do get sick. Maybe it was the water, maybe it was that suspicious turnip stew, maybe you just stubbed your toe on a rock shaped like despair. Either way, you need help. A doctor. Too bad it's the Middle Ages. Here, medicine is just torture wrapped in theology. Let's begin with the diagnosis. Every illness, whether it's a sniffle, a rash, or the plague itself, is blamed on your humors being out of balance. According to the best minds of the time, your body is full of 4 liquids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health depends on keeping this internal soup in perfect harmony. Fever, that's too much blood. Solution, bloodletting. You'll have your life force drained into a bowl using a rusty blade or a particularly aggressive leech. And who performs this noble service? The barber. That's right, 1 trim and a transfusion, all in 1 chair. Feeling down or anxious, clearly in excess of black bile. The cure? Laxatives, herbal purges if you're lucky, prayers and awkward silences if you're not. Break a bone or get a nasty wound. Good luck. No anesthesia. Surgery is done with iron tools that haven't been cleaned since the last crusade. They're heated over flame, not to sterilize them, just to make them look terrifying. Germ theory won't exist for centuries. Disease, that's caused by bad smells, or worse, God being annoyed with your moral failings. If your condition worsens, they'll bring in more leeches, maybe some crushed beetles, and definitely a priest. Because you're not healing, you're being prepared for the final cure, death. If you somehow survive, everyone assumes divine mercy. The doctor takes credit. The leech gets promoted. After a long day of labor, leeches, and humiliation, you return to your hovel. Your stomach growls, Surely at least dinner will offer some comfort. Not quite. Your meal is trying to kill you too. Food preservation? Not a thing. No fridge. No freeze. Just salt, smoke or winter air to delay the inevitable rot. Your meat, if you're lucky enough to have any, has been hanging for days, buzzing with flies and soaked in questionable brine. It might have been nibbled on by a rat or two. Bread is the cornerstone of your diet, but during bad harvests, peasants bulk it up with bark, sawdust, or clay, and in rye season, there's an extra treat, ergot, a fungus that causes convulsions, hallucinations and death. It's like biting into a loaf laced with LSD and lockjaw. Vegetables? Only if they're in season. And guess what's always in season? Turnips. Boiled turnips. Mashed turnips. Turnips floating in a pot of swampy stew that's been simmering since your grandfather died. Fruit exists briefly in the fall, then rots. Sugar is hoarded by the rich, flaunted with blackened teeth as a status symbol. Milk spoils in hours. Butter and cheese are bacterial breeding grounds. People eat them anyway. It's either that or chew on boot leather. Spices, like pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg, worth more than gold. You won't taste any of them. Your flavor options are onions, salt, if you're lucky, and resignation. Most meals taste like damp burlap sprinkled with despair. And food isn't just a health hazard, it's a legal one. Game animals belong to the Lord. Poach a rabbit, and you might lose a hand or your head. So, as you sit beside your flickering fire, spooning gray stew into your mouth, know that every bite is a gamble, but you eat anyway, because in the Middle Ages, food doesn't nourish, it tests you. Evening falls, you've survived another day, barely, but don't get comfortable, because now it's time for the real boss battle. The church. Religion isn't a part of life, it is life. The church owns your calendar, your laws, your education, if you can read, and your soul. From the moment you're born to the moment you're buried, it's there, watching, judging and collecting tithes. Every day is structured by prayer bells. They ring morning, noon and night, not as reminders, but as alarms. Miss one, that's a sin. Forget to bow, sin. Eat meat on Friday, sin. Dream about your neighbor's wife, double sin. And hell, oh it's real, rivers of fire, boiling blood, screaming souls. Priests describe it in horrifying detail, just in case the plague didn't scare you enough. You can't read the Bible yourself. It's in Latin. The priest tells you what it says. If your crops fail, it's not bad weather. It's your fault. You didn't pray hard enough. So you try harder, and pay tithes, 1/10 of everything you own. Wheat, eggs. Even if you have nothing, you're still spiritually bankrupt. Holy days offer breaks from labor, but not for fun. They're for mass, fasting, confession and shame. Questioning the church. Heresy. Heresy means being burned, drowned, or flogged until you're reformed or dead. You kneel, you chant, you pray that maybe, after all this, your soul will find peace, but only if the priest approves, because God may be merciful. The church, not so much. Think things are bad now. Try being a woman. Same filth, same famine, same fear, plus childbirth, silence and second-class everything. Being a woman in the Middle Ages is like playing life on hard mode, with no respawn and no healing potion. From birth, your future is set. Marry young, have babies, serve your husband, die tired. Education, only if you're rich and cloistered in a convent. Otherwise you stop learning the moment you master churning butter and mending clothes. Marriage happens early. 12 is not unusual. Pregnant by 14. Love has nothing to do with it. It's about land and livestock. Your opinion, irrelevant. Once married, you're your husband's property. Your job is to produce sons, feed everyone, and never complain. Complaining gets you labeled a nag, or worse, a witch, which comes with a bonus execution. Childbirth is a death lottery. No pain relief, no hygiene, just hope. Survive 10 pregnancies? Congratulations, you're a legend. Die after 2. That's more common. After the baby comes, there's no rest. Now you've got to nurse, cook, clean, and work the fields. You don't get a break. You are the break. If you're single, you're suspicious. Widowed, vulnerable, outspoken, dangerous. Women with herbal knowledge or just too much confidence risk being called witches, and witches get burned, even in the church. You're second class. Nuns follow strict silence, limited movement and constant obedience. Your spiritual worth, always ranked below men. In the Middle Ages, being a woman means enduring, obeying, reproducing, and suffering in silence, preferably with a pleasant smile. But just when you think it can't get any worse, here comes the final ingredient in this medieval nightmare stew: violence. The average life expectancy in the Middle Ages hovered somewhere between 30 and 40 years, but that grim number is dragged low by a brutal truth. Half of all children never made it to their 5th birthday. Disease, hunger, even one bad winter could be enough to snuff out a tiny flame of life. There were no vaccines, no antibiotics, and precious little hope. If you did survive childhood, you entered adulthood already worn thin. Work began the moment you could walk without falling over, and by the age of 25 your joints creaked like the hinges on a monastery door. By then you might be missing several teeth, perhaps a finger, and almost certainly most of your original optimism. Women faced a particularly cruel hazard: childbirth, one of the leading causes of death for women in the medieval world. It offered no pain relief, no surgical intervention, only prayer, hot water, and the comforting hand of someone as you bled out on a straw-stuffed cot. For men, the dangers were different but no less constant: farming accidents, festering wounds, drunken brawls, the whim of a vengeful neighbor, or a crusade gone catastrophically wrong. Even the simple act of walking to the market could be a gamble. A bored bandit, a greedy tax collector, or a local militia in a bad mood could turn a routine stroll into a fatal mistake. Death didn't always come with a shout. Sometimes it crept quietly in the form of plague, turning thriving towns into silent cemeteries overnight. Or famine, which didn't kill fast, but slowly, pitilessly, hollowing out entire villages. Sometimes death was absurd, like hallucinating and dying after eating spoiled rye grain infected with ergot, a natural LSD. And funerals, only if you were lucky. Most corpses were shoved into shallow holes as quickly as possible to avoid spreading disease. No embalming, no polished coffins, just a few whispered prayers and a mound of earth, if there was even space left in the churchyard. Life in medieval Europe was nasty, brutish, and short. Retirement wasn't a stage of life. It was just stopping. You didn't clock out, you simply stopped showing up. And speaking of exits, let's talk about your final chapter. By now your body aches from dawn to dusk. You've woken up in filth, relieved yourself in a bucket, brushed your teeth with hopeful spit, and gone to bed praying you don't wake up with plague. You worked until your spine begged for mercy, wore itchy wool that made you scratch like mad, and narrowly avoided execution for the crime of owning a squirrel. Welcome to just one day in the Middle Ages. Still fantasizing about being a knight? Think again. That noble image, swords flashing, courtly love, feasts in glowing halls, is a fantasy crafted by poets and fairy tales. The real Middle Ages were not romantic. They were rigid, cruel, and suffocating. Your birth status determined your destiny. Born poor, you stayed poor. Born rich, you had better odds, sure, but you were still just one bowl of rancid soup away from dysentery and a hasty burial. Even the nobles weren't immune. Castles were cold, smoky, rat-infested fortresses, where arranged marriages were political, not passionate. Yes, you might sip wine in a fur cloak, but you also had a 50% chance of dying from an infected splinter or a noble feud gone wrong. The so-called simpler times weren't simple. They were exhausting. Everything took longer, hurt more, and left scar. From childbirth to chewing, pain was your constant companion. And dreams, they were dangerous. There was no social ladder, no medicine, no Google to ask about that strange rash. You lived, suffered, and died within a 10-mile radius of where you were born. And yet somehow, people still laughed. They sang songs, told stories, found love, and even joy. Not because life was kind, but because people are stubborn that way. Even in the darkest corners they carved out slivers of light. So tonight, when you slide into your clean bed, under warm blankets, in a house with plumbing, medicine, and central heat, maybe whisper a quiet thank you to those who came before you, the ones who fought rats, famine, and feudalism, so you wouldn't have to. Long before she was Catherine the Great, Empress of all Russia, the enlightened autocrat, the iron reformer, she was simply Sophie, born in 1729, as Sophie Friederike, Augusta von Anhalt-Zerbst. She was the daughter of a minor German prince, from a duchy so obscure you'd struggle to find it on a map. But Sophie
Sophie had something far more valuable than title or wealth. An intellect like sharpened steel, a magnetic charm, and a quiet, relentless hunger for greatness. Her upbringing was cold and calculating. Her mother, Johanna, was obsessed with courtly status, treating Sophie more like a tool than a daughter. Her father, a Prussian officer, was emotionally distant. From childhood, Sophie learned how to survive through observation, reading people, reading rooms, saying little but learning much. She devoured books, mastered languages, and learned when to smile and when to stay silent. These skills would become her armor in one of Europe's most treacherous courts. When Russian Empress Elizabeth began searching for a bride for her heir, the awkward and emotionally stunted Grand Duke Peter, she looked westward to the German states. Peter, himself of German blood, was thought to be more controllable with a foreign wife. Enter Sophie. She checked every box: noble lineage, Lutheran faith, soon to be abandoned, and a reputation for humility. At just 14, she was summoned to Russia, shipped off to St. Petersburg in a thin German dress and a tightly practiced smile. Her mother nudged her forward like a chess piece. Sophie, however, already had her own game in mind.
To win favor, Sophie converted to Orthodoxy, took the name Ekaterina Alexievna, Catherine, and publicly burned the bridge back to her former life. She wasn't just changing her religion. She was becoming Russian. No one watching that quiet teenage girl in her fur-trimmed coat could have guessed what was coming. Revolution, betrayal, empire. The pawn was already plotting how to become queen. Her marriage to Peter should have secured her position, but it felt more like a prison. Peter wasn't the charming prince from storybooks. He was awkward, petty, immature, more interested in toy soldiers than his wife. Some say he didn't even consummate the marriage for years. He worshipped Frederick the Great of Prussia, and openly mocked the Russian customs and people. Catherine, by contrast, embraced Russia. She learned its language, its history, its soul. She studied Orthodox rites, memorized its saints, and made herself one of them. While Peter sulked, Catherine prepared. The Russian court was a nest of snakes, paranoia, gossip, spies. Catherine's letters were read, her friends monitored, her life scrutinized. She couldn't trust her husband. She couldn't trust her mother. So she trusted herself. Quietly she built alliances, befriending military officers, flattering scholars, cultivating a reputation for dignity. Behind closed doors, she read Enlightenment thinkers, Voltaire, Montesquieu, and began dreaming, not just of power, but of progress. She didn't want to be just a queen. She wanted to be a philosopher empress. But there was a problem. Peter, as long as he lived, she would remain a powerless wife, tied to a man unfit to rule. So she waited, and she planned. In 1762, after nearly 2 decades of strategy, her moment arrived. Empress Elizabeth died. Peter ascended as Tsar Peter III, and immediately began dismantling the fragile goodwill of his people. He alienated the church, insulted the nobility, humiliated the army, and praised Russia's sworn enemy, Prussia. He mocked Russian traditions, and openly spoke of divorcing Catherine to marry his mistress. Catherine knew what had to be done. That July, while Peter was away at his summer palace, she struck. With the support of the Imperial Guard, key military figures, including her lover Grigory Orlov, and the silent approval of much of the nobility, she marched into St. Petersburg and declared herself empress. Peter, stunned and alone, surrendered within days. Shortly after, he was dead. Officially, a sudden illness; unofficially, assassination. Catherine was now ruler, not by inheritance, not by marriage, but by ambition, intelligence, and sheer audacity. She had taken the throne without a battle, but holding it would be a far greater challenge. She knew power won through intrigue could vanish just as quickly, so she transformed herself, not from a usurper to a tyrant, but into a visionary, one who would reshape not only Russia's borders, but its very soul. But she also reaffirmed the nobility's control over their serfs, to keep their loyalty intact. This was Catherine's delicate dance. Outwardly a philosopher queen, privately a shrewd empress, she walked a razor-thin line between Enlightenment idealism and political survival, straddling 2 worlds, the gleaming salons of Paris and the gritty, frost-bitten realities of Moscow. Catherine didn't want to make Russia European. She wanted to make it modern, but on her own terms. That meant reform, yes, but always wrapped in velvet and reinforced with iron. And Catherine wasn't content to reshape Russia only from within.
She envisioned an empire that radiated outward, a realm so vast and formidable that it demanded fear, admiration, and envy. Where Peter the Great once opened a mere window to the west, Catherine came with a wrecking ball. Under her leadership, Russia's borders exploded outward, expanding farther than ever before. She waged war not just for defense, but for dominion, wars that didn't merely redraw maps, but reshaped the balance of power across Europe. Her most significant military struggles came against the Ottoman Empire, a series of brutal campaigns fought through the 7th. To Catherine, these wars were not only about seizing land, they were about seizing influence. She cast herself as the protector of Orthodox Christians living under Muslim rule, the rightful guardian of Eastern Europe, and with the help of brilliant generals like Alexander Suvorov and Grigory Potemkin, she achieved stunning victories. Crimea was taken, the northern coast of the Black Sea fell under Russian command. Long-sought warm water ports, prized by Russian rulers for generations, finally came under imperial control. These were not just military conquests, they were symbolic triumphs. Each step forward told the world that Russia was no longer a backward cousin, it was a continental power. But her ambitions didn't stop at the southern front. Catherine turned westward and played the chessboard of diplomacy with ruthless precision. In a series of cold-blooded negotiations, she joined Austria and Prussia in carving up the dying Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. By the time of the Third Partition in 1795, Poland had vanished from the map. Russia absorbed vast, new territories, and millions of new subjects. No blood spilled on the battlefield, but borders moved all the same. Yet Catherine didn't just conquer with armies, she colonized with ideas. New cities rose across the empire, trade routes stretched farther, German settlers were invited to tame the steppes and transform them into productive farmland. Russia became a patchwork of cultures and peoples, stretching from the frozen shores of the Baltic to the sunlit coastlines of the Black Sea. And at the center of it all was Catherine, reading reports, giving orders, overseeing her mosaic empire like a master strategist. Critics would sneer, calling her power-hungry or imperialistic, but to Catherine, expansion wasn't ambition, it was destiny. She believed a monarch's greatness wasn't measured in poetry or promises, but in land, in loyalty, and in legacy. She didn't just want to govern Russia, she wanted to transform it into a civilized empire, respected, feared, and hers alone. For all her intellect and discipline, Catherine was just as infamous for what happened behind closed doors. Not all her power came from strategy, some of it came from seduction. Her love life was as legendary as her rule. She didn't hide her affairs. In fact, she orchestrated them with care. One lover after another, a rotating cast of dashing young men, often decades younger, were elevated, rewarded with lands, titles and pensions, provided they played their part well, and when they didn't, they were dismissed with grace, perhaps even a promotion, and replaced without scandal. Among them, one stood apart, Grigory Potemkin. More than a lover, he was her equal. Their bond blurred the lines between romance and politics, becoming a powerful partnership that shaped the future of southern Russia. Some believe they secretly married. If so, it was a union of empire builders, not fairy tales. Potemkin and Catherine planned cities, organized colonies, and carved Russia's future together. Yet European courts couldn't see past the scandal. Satirical pamphlets painted her as an insatiable seductress. After her death, rumors spiraled into outright lies, the most infamous being a grotesque falsehood involving a horse, spread by her enemies to smear her name. But why the obsession? The answer is simple. Catherine broke the mold. She was a woman who wielded power without apology in a world that demanded female rulers be either saints or martyrs. She was neither. She ruled, she loved, she conquered, on her own terms, and that made her dangerous. Ironically, while gossip accused her of being immoral, Catherine's view of love and sex was deeply philosophical. She believed pleasure was natural, that personal relationships need not compromise public responsibility. Unlike many male rulers, she separated emotion from governance. Her relationships were often strategic, her lovers chosen for loyalty, intelligence, and political value, and when their usefulness ended, they were let go, kindly, but firmly. Her love life didn't weaken her, it was part of her arsenal, a fusion of passion and politics that made her unforgettable. Still, even the most formidable monarch cannot escape peril, and in 1773, that danger came not from foreign powers, but from within. A bearded Cossack, named Yemelyan Pugachev, rose up with an audacious claim. He was Peter III, Catherine's long-dead husband, returned from the grave to take back his throne. Of course, Peter was truly dead, But Pugachev's lie didn't need to be believable, it only needed to offer hope. To the oppressed serfs, taxed into misery, and chained to the land, Pugachev promised freedom, no more serfdom, fewer taxes, land for all. His words sparked a fire that swept across the Volga. The peasants, the Cossacks, the old believers, all the downtrodden and disillusioned, rallied to his banner. The Pugachev rebellion became the largest peasant uprising in Russian history. Fortresses fell, nobles were slaughtered. For a terrifying moment, Catherine's vast empire teetered on the edge of collapse. This was no war she could fight with treaties and cavalry. This was her own people, rising against the very system she commanded. But Catherine did not flinch. She acted with cold precision. The imperial army crushed the revolt in Pugachev was captured, displayed in a cage, then beheaded in Moscow, a brutal warning etched in blood. In the aftermath, Catherine changed. Her dream of liberating the serfs, once whispered in enlightened circles, faded into silence. The rebellion had revealed the harsh truth. Russia was still a feudal colossus, and change came with fire. Catherine tightened her grip. She leaned harder on the nobility, offering them greater control in exchange for loyalty. Reform became cautious. Surveillance increased. Rebellion, even hinted at, was crushed before it could take root. Pugachev was dead, but his ghost lingered, a reminder that power built on inequality will always be haunted by the storm. By the twilight of her reign, Catherine had ruled longer than any woman in Russian history, over 3 transformative decades. From the moment she seized the throne, she had defied every expectation. Under her, Russia became a true powerhouse. The empire grew by more than 200,000 square miles. Crimea, parts of Poland, and the Black Sea coast were all absorbed, shifting Russia's destiny forever. But Catherine's legacy wasn't just written in conquests. She left a cultural renaissance in her wake. She helped found the Hermitage Museum, amassing one of Europe's greatest art collections. She exchanged letters with Enlightenment thinkers. Her court became a hub of sophistication and intellect. She founded schools for girls, introduced smallpox inoculation, modernized printing. She dragged Russia, sometimes kicking and screaming, into the modern age.
And yet, for all her brilliance, contradictions clung to her. She admired Enlightenment ideals, but kept serfdom entrenched. Her reforms often polished the surface, rather than changing the roots. Still, she brought stability and ambition to a nation that had long lacked both. She didn't rule by divine right. She ruled by force of will, by genius, and by sheer political nerve. People called her a tyrant, a manipulator, a reformer, a temptress, but above all, they called her effective. When she died in 1796, she left behind a Russian empire that was richer, stronger, and larger than it had been in centuries. Her throne was secure, her legend unstoppable. She had reshaped Russia, and in doing so she became more than a monarch. She became a myth. Beneath the imperial crown was still a woman, a foreigner who seized power in a world that never wanted her to have it. She had come to the throne through a coup, ruled an empire reluctant to trust a woman, and yet she didn't just endure. She dominated. Catherine read constantly, wrote obsessively, and governed tirelessly. Her days were filled with reports, diplomacy, statecraft, and court intrigue, and yet she was often lonely, surrounded by flatterers and favorites. She confided in her memoirs how few she truly trusted. Her son Paul, whom she deliberately kept away from power, became the one she feared would destroy everything she built. Her deepest emotional bond, with Potemkin, eventually faded to friendship, and when he died in 1791, it left a wound she never healed. Catherine understood image. She crafted it like a sculptor, posing as mother of the nation, patron of the arts, warrior queen. But behind those portraits was a woman who endured betrayal, rebellion, scandal, and sorrow, and still stood tall. When she passed, she left behind not just an empire, but a question: was she truly a child of the Enlightenment, or simply its most skilled manipulator? History gave her a title she never claimed for herself: the Great, not because she was just or perfect, but because in a world that gave women no room to rule, she carved herself a throne. She didn't simply wear the crown. She rewrote the very meaning of power. As the heavy lid creaked open, a cloud of red dust burst into the air. Brilliant,
strange and haunting. It rose like smoke from a forgotten fire, coating the tomb in a vivid crimson haze. This wasn't ordinary dust. It was powdered cinnabar, mercury sulfide used ceremonially by the ancient Maya in rites of the dead. Toxic, sacred, and dazzling, it signaled that what lay beneath was no ordinary burial. Within that red mist lay a skeleton, delicate yet intact. The bones belonged to a woman. She had been placed there with care, her body cradled by time and ritual. Across her fragile skull rested a jade mask, serene and still. Around her, offerings glittered in the shadows. Necklaces, diadems, ear spools, all crafted from jade and shell. Materials reserved for the elite. Everything whispered royalty, and yet no glyph named her. No inscription spoke her story. She was an enigma, a mystery as profound as the red dust that shrouded her. Archaeologists gave her a name, the Red Queen, and though her true identity remained hidden, she was interred sometime in the 7th century, during the golden age of Palenque. Her tomb was unlike most Maya burials, secret, untouched, intentionally isolated. This wasn't just ceremony, it was sanctity. Her memory was not meant to be preserved in words, but in symbols and color, in ritual. The Red Queen was to be remembered through mystery. The most haunting presence in her tomb wasn't the mask, or the jewelry, or even the silence. It was the dust. The cinnabar clung to everything. The sarcophagus, the floor, the bones, the offering. It lay thick, like dried blood, smothering stone and scarlet. To the Maya, this wasn't just beautiful, it was spiritual. Cinnabar's vivid red hue symbolized blood, rebirth, and the divine spark, connecting the human and the sacred. It was the color of the rising sun, of sacrifice, of life transmuted through death. To coat a body in cinnabar was to prepare it, not just for burial, but for transformation. Death, in Maya belief, was not an end. It was a journey into the cosmic layers beyond, and the Red Queen was being ritually armed for that journey. But cinnabar is also deadly. Prolonged exposure can cause tremors, hallucinations, even death, through mercury poisoning. The Maya didn't know the chemistry, but they knew its power. Cinnabar was volatile, dangerous. To use it so lavishly was to declare that this woman had transcended mortality. In Palenque, only a few were honored this way. One of them was Pakal the Great, the mighty king whose tomb dominates the city. His body too was cloaked in cinnabar. That detail drew scholars into speculation. Was the Red Queen his wife, his mother, his spiritual equal? Her skull rested atop jaguar skin, another sacred element. Around her lay bone needles, obsidian blades, and tiny jade figurines. These weren't trinkets, they were clues, symbols of rituals performed either during her life or in her honor at death. Her story was told in silence, in sacred tools and symbolic placement. A woman prepared not merely for burial, but for crossing worlds, wrapped in the red of sacrifice. Surrounding her were treasures chosen with precision, not opulence. Jade, obsidian, and shell gleamed in the low tomb light, silent but speaking volumes. These were not decorative, they were offerings meant to accompany her into Subalba, the Maya underworld. On either side of her were heavy jade necklaces, still radiant after 13 centuries underground. Jade in Maya culture wasn't just valuable, it was sacred. It symbolized life, maize, the breath of the gods. Only the elite were buried with. For the Red Queen, jade adorned her chest, wrists, and ears, marking her status, not just as elite, but as spiritually potent. Most striking of all was the jade death mask, delicately placed over her face. Unlike the gilded masks of Egypt, this one was crafted from tiny mosaic tiles, pieced together to mirror her features. It served a ritual purpose, to preserve her identity, protect her soul, and present her as divine before the god. Scattered nearby were more ritual tools, bone needles, obsidian knives, engraved bone pins. One of them bore markings, faint but deliberate, an echo of her voice, long since silent. Ceramic vessels lined the edges of the tomb, sealed, perhaps still holding food, incense, or drink, essentials for a soul on its perilous journey beyond death. The Red Queen's tomb was not overloaded with grandeur. It was intimate, intentional. There was no gold, no chariot, just meaning, packed into every object. Every placement, her burial was a map, a guide for her soul's passage. Through it we glimpse how the Maya viewed death, not as an end, but as transformation. The Red Queen wasn't buried to be forgotten, she was buried to ascend. And yet, the central question remained unanswered. No name, no glyph, no inscription. Who was she? From the moment her tomb was discovered, speculation ignited. The leading theory that she was Tako Aja, wife of Pakal the Great, Palenque's most legendary ruler. More than just a consort, Tako Aja was a queen in her own right, born of noble blood and married into Palenque's dynasty. While still young, she bore at least 3 sons, all of whom held royal status, and played a central ceremonial role during her husband's reign. If anyone deserved such a burial, it was her. Supporting this theory was the tomb's location, just meters from Pakal's own, in the Temple of the Inscriptions. The placement seemed deliberate. King and queen, laid to rest side by side. And then, the Sinab. Only 2 tombs in Palenque were so saturated in it, Pakal's and hers. Still, mystery clung to the evidence. DNA tests were conducted, comparing the Red Queen's remains to Pakal's. The results were inconclusive. She showed no direct maternal link, but that didn't rule out marriage. Blood wasn't required for love or for power. Some proposed other identities. Could she have been Sakok, Pakal's formidable mother, who ruled before him, or perhaps a priestess, a sister, a matriarch, whose name faded from the record? Yet all clues seemed to point back to Tako Aja, Queen Mother of Kings, the woman behind the throne. The absence of her name may not be a mystery, but a mess. In Maya cosmology, memory wasn't preserved in stone, it lived in ritual, in the breath of color, in the symbols passed from one generation to the next. And so the Red Queen remains poised between history and myth, a woman of power, remembered not in words, but in scarlet and silence. To truly understand her, we must understand the world she came from, a world where Maya royal women wielded far more power than history once acknowledged. Politics in Maya civilization was deeply familial. Royal women were not mere ornaments to power. They were power. They acted as diplomats, priestesses, rulers. They oversaw construction, led ceremonies and brokered alliances. Their bloodlines legitimized thrones. Their rituals upheld cosmic balance.
Consider Sakuk, mother of Pakal. When the throne of Palenque stood vacant, she ruled, not as a regent in name only, but as a sovereign issuing decrees and managing affairs of state. Without her there may never have been a Pakal the Great, and she was not unique. In cities like Yaxchilan, Naranjo and Calakmul, inscriptions depict women leading rituals, commissioning monuments, and sometimes leading in war. Their stories were carved in stone, until they weren't. Spanish colonizers erased much, and what they didn't destroy, time obscured. But the archaeology speaks. Power among Maya women was real, negotiated, and revered. This changes how we see the Red Queen, her tomb's elegance, her proximity to Pakal, the sacred artifacts. These aren't just evidence of her rank, they reveal her central place in a kingdom's story. Her jade mask wasn't just ceremonial, it was political. Her legacy may have been the glue that held the dynasty together. In the world of the Maya, a queen was more than a consort. She was lineage keeper, ritual leader, and bridge between gods and men. The Red Queen may remain unnamed, but never voiceless. Her tomb speaks still, and we are listening. Neas together, they embodied a cosmic duality, masculine and feminine, king and queen, sun and moon, order and ritual. In Maya mythology, rulership was not a singular pursuit, it was relational. Harmony in the cosmos required balance, and that balance extended into the dynastic court. By placing the Red Queen beside King Pakal, the Maya were preserving more than a marriage. They were preserving a sacred partnership, one that echoed the structure of the universe itself. Their closeness in death may have reflected their roles in life. She was not merely behind him, but beside him, a queen who shared not only his throne, but his legacy. In the silence of their tombs, they speak still, without words, but with presence. 2 souls wrapped in cinnabar and stone, joined for eternity. One of history's most sacred silences. Though her name has been lost to time, the Red Queen of Palenque endures, not as a forgotten relic, but as one of the most enigmatic and powerful women of the ancient world. Her tomb, sealed for more than 1,300 years, now breathes again. It whispers across the centuries, inviting questions that echo louder with every discovery. She is a mystery that resists complete understanding. No glyph records her name, no stela tells her story, and yet her lavish burial, the richness of her offerings, the crimson of her bones, each detail speaks of someone with profound influence, not merely a consort, but a woman of spiritual weight, royal blood, and real power. She challenges us to reconsider assumptions. She reminds us that Maya women were not silent. They led rituals, governed cities, and shaped dynasties. While kings like Pakal have long stood in the spotlight, the Red Queen's re-emergence is a quiet revolution, one that reclaims a lineage of mothers, queens, priestesses, and visionaries. Her legacy is not only in the jade and cinnabar, but in the conversations she has reignited among archaeologists, historians, artists, and dreamers. Every offering, every architectural choice, every ceremonial layer of red powder, none of it was accidental. This woman mattered, and perhaps that is the most extraordinary part of her story. Not what we know, but what we still don't. The Red Queen reminds us that history is not just a timeline of facts. It is a living puzzle, a shared human yearning to connect with the past. In that way, her story is still unfolding. She lies wrapped in red, the color of life and sacrifice, of blood and rebirth. Her face, once hidden behind a jade mask, now gazes back at us through science, art, and imagination. She remains nameless, but not voiceless, mysterious, but not forgotten. In life, the Red Queen may have ruled a kingdom, but in death, she rules something even greater, our collective imagination. Her tomb was sealed in stone, her story was written in silence, and still, somehow, she speaks. And just as silence once surrounded a queen, another woman, born centuries later in a different corner of the world, would rise from her own pain to speak in defiance, in color, and in brushstroke. That woman was Frida Kahlo. She was born on July 6, 1907, in the vibrant neighborhood of Coyoacán, then a quiet village on the outskirts of Mexico City. Her childhood home, the Casa Azul, the Blue House, was a place of contradiction, warmth, and austerity, tradition, and rebellion. It would become a sanctuary, a battleground, and eventually a museum to one of the most iconic artists of the 20th century. Frida was the third of 4 daughters born to Guillermo Kahlo, a German-Hungarian photographer, and Matilde Calderón, a devout Catholic with indigenous and Spanish roots. Her parents were opposites. Guillermo, reserved and intellectual; Matilde, religious and emotionally distant. From her father, Frida inherited introspection and an artistic eye. From her mother, resilience like stone. As a child, Frida was bold, curious, and uncontainable. She devoured books, and asked the kinds of questions that adults often avoided. At 6, her life was interrupted by polio, which left her right leg thinner and weaker than the other, a difference she later cloaked in long skirts but never allowed to dull her fire. The illness confined her to bed for months, isolating her from other children, but it drew her closer to her father, who encouraged her to stay active, ride bicycles, and sharpen her mind. Frida never dreamed of domestic life. Her ambition was to become a doctor. At 15, she entered the National Preparatory School in Mexico City, one of only a few girls among hundreds of boys. There she shined, brilliant, rebellious, and original. She joined a group of radical thinkers known as the Cachuchas, debating politics, literature, and revolution. Even then, Frida was carving out her own place in the world, raw, uncompromising, and unapologetically herself. But on September 17, 1925, her path was violently and irrevocably changed. That afternoon, she boarded a wooden bus with her boyfriend Alejandro Gomez Arias. They were laughing, teasing, perhaps even arguing. Frida never did anything halfway. Moments later, a streetcar slammed into the bus, shattering it against a wall. The impact was devastating. A metal handrail pierced Frida's body, entering her left hip and exiting through her pelvis. Her spine fractured in 3 places, her leg shattered, her shoulder dislocated, her collarbone broke. She was just 18. Someone covered her with a borrowed coat. Another person noticed something strange. Her body sparkled, not from blood, but from the gold powder she had carried in a pouch. It had burst open on impact, dusting her broken form in glittering dust. It looked surreal, beautiful, tragic. Frida was rushed to the Red Cross hospital and endured surgery after surgery. She spent months encased in a full-body cast, confined to her bed, staring at the ceiling. The future she'd imagined, medicine, independence, purpose, slipped away. But in that stillness, something stirred. Her father gave her brushes. Her mother built a custom easel above her bed. A mirror was fastened to the canopy so she could see her own face. And so, Frida began to paint. At first it was boredom, then obsession. With her body broken and isolated, she turned to the only subject available, herself. But it wasn't vanity, it was survival. She painted not to decorate, but to express the pain that language could not touch. She transformed her suffering into imagery, raw, symbolic, deeply personal. Each painting was a reclamation. Her broken body became her muse, her emotions, her battlefield. She painted herself pierced, bleeding, decapitated, but always with eyes open, always watching. Her art didn't flinch, and neither did she. She once said, "I paint myself because I am so often alone, and because I am the subject I know best." In those early years, her small paintings on tin and wood resembled Mexican retablos, devotional pieces meant to show miracles and suffering. But Frida turned the tradition inward. Her body became the altar, her pain, the offering. And when she finally stood again, walking painfully with a cane, she was no longer the girl who had dreamed of becoming a doctor. She was an artist, and her art would not whisper. It would demand to be seen. But even as her artistic voice grew louder and more assured, Frida's body continued its slow rebellion. Her health declined relentlessly. Surgery after surgery, infection after infection, pain that curled its fingers into her every waking moment. Yet she refused surrender, even as her spine crumbled and her right leg became a battlefield of infection. She painted, propped up in bed, her torso strapped in corsets, her hand gripping the brush with clenched resolve. She had returned to Mexico not to rest, but to reclaim her power through her art, through her politics, and through the fierce, unapologetic act of being fully herself. The 1920s brought no mercy to her body. More than 30 surgeries, often in brutal succession, left her bedridden for months on end, immobilized in traction devices, or entombed in body casts. But still she painted. Each canvas became her rebellion, each stroke of the brush an act of endurance. Her work turned darker, sharper, more direct. She stopped hiding pain in symbols. She let it show. In the broken column, she paints herself split in two, nails piercing her skin, an ionic column cracked and fragile, replacing her spine, and yet her face remains calm, her gaze steady. Pain was no longer just her subject, it was her companion, her opponent, her muse, and her voice. Her political fire grew stronger still. She rejoined the Mexican Communist Party, marched in the streets, wrote searing letters, and condemned imperialism without restraint. Even when her body failed her legs, she showed up at protests in a wheelchair, fists raised, signs held high, shouting truth into the face of power. Then, in 1953, came the moment she had waited for her whole life. Her first solo exhibition in Mexico. Her doctors told her she was too fragile to attend, but Frida had never let fragility stop her. She arrived by ambulance, carried into the gallery on a stretcher, her hospital bed placed right in the center of the room, dressed in vibrant traditional Tawana dress, surrounded by her own art. She greeted guests with tequila, wit, and fire still flickering behind tired eyes. Her final works walked a tightrope between innocence and despair. In Marxism will give health to the sick. She paints herself in a steel corset, supported by the hands of Marx, casting aside symbols of repression. Her last known painting, a still life of sliced watermelons, bears a handwritten phrase, "Viva la vida," long live life. Even as death crept closer, she answered with color, defiance, and a fierce love of being. On July 13, 1954, at the age of 47, Frida Kahlo died in the same place where her story had begun, La Casa Azul, in Coyoacán. The official cause was a pulmonary embolism, but those who loved her whispered other truths, that perhaps she was simply exhausted by the pain, by the surgeries, by a lifelong war against her own flesh. Only days before, she had insisted on attending a protest against the CIA-backed coup in Guatemala. Fragile, in a wheelchair, she still raised her fist high. Revolution, always, was her final heartbeat. Her last diary entry was a short, searing farewell. "I hope the exit is joyful and I hope never to return." Frida's funeral was held at the Palacio de Bellas Artes, the pinnacle of Mexico's cultural heritage, draped in the red flag of the Communist Party. Her body lay in state as mourners came, artists, friends, revolutionaries, lovers. Diego Rivera, shattered by grief, called her the love of his life, even after all his betrayals had nearly broken hers. But Frida refused to vanish. In the years following her death, her name was kept alive in hushed reverence. Her paintings defied easy classification, too political for the surrealists, too surreal for the realists. But slowly, a movement began, through the 1970s and 80s, as feminist voices rose and demanded recognition for those long forgotten. Frida's voice joined them, bold, clear, and defiant. She was no longer just an artist. She became a symbol of suffering transformed into power, of femininity carved from fire, of Mexican identity celebrated without apology, of queerness, of disability, of rebellion lived with raw honesty. Her face, unibrow, flowers, fierce gaze became iconic. Her home turned into a museum. Her diary became sacred text. Her paintings found places in the world's greatest galleries. Frida Kahlo, who had once lived in Diego's shadow, stepped into her own light. She didn't just leave behind art, she left behind a mirror, and dared us to look into it, not with pity but with courage. Today, her face is everywhere, on murals, t-shirts, dolls, memes, posters. But what matters isn't how often we see her image. It's why we remember her, because Frida never pretended to be perfect. She didn't fit into molds. She didn't try to in a world obsessed with neatness and polish. She gave us the truth, unfiltered, messy, vibrant, angry, joyful, contradictory. She wore her differences as her crown, her disability, her bisexuality, her culture, her politics, and turned them into something that spoke across borders, across time. She became more than an artist. She became a movement to queer communities. She's a fearless, bisexual icon who lived with defiance in a world that demanded silence. To women, she's proof that strength doesn't need permission. To disabled creators, she's a beacon, showing that pain can be fuel, not a cage. And to Mexico, she's a daughter reclaimed, fierce, folkloric, and forever part of its soul. Her works, once dismissed as strange, are now treasures. The two Fridas, self-portrait with thorn necklace and hummingbird, the broken column. These aren't just paintings, they're sacred to anyone who's ever turned suffering into beauty. Frida lived in the margins, and made them the center. She was contradiction incarnate, a communist who wore gold, a betrayed woman who still loved, a broken body with an unbreakable spirit. And through it all she painted, not just with color, but with conviction. She never asked to be an icon, she just told the truth about herself, and in doing so, she told the truth for millions, who had never seen themselves in art before. Now, when we see her face, we see something more. We see courage, we see color, we see resistance, we see Frida, not gone, but immortal.